And you said, Mr. Iga, you referenced Mr. Bitature and his presence, his willingness to teach a lot of young people, to be present, to give of his time, which for an entrepreneur is actually sometimes a lot harder than giving some money. Time is what we work with, and oftentimes you never have time for your own family, you never have time for friends, you never have time for your own self. You just have time for the hustle. So if those people give away time, you have to appreciate them. But also we have to remember that it's our responsibility as entrepreneurs to bring up the next generation, to share the nuggets we've learned over time, and hope that younger people do not have to reinvent the wheel. Entrepreneurship is already hard enough as it is. You need to be protected from mistakes of the people who went before you. And so I have to applaud Enterprise Uganda for putting together talks like this, because these help to kind of smoothen. We have the second youngest population in the world after Niger, and we're just getting younger. The recent census showed that nearly 90% of Ugandans are below the age of 40. That is wild. While we recognize that the system isn't churning out jobs as fast as it should, so we need to ensure that entrepreneurs are growing their companies to be able to employ lots more people. Now, I'll get into my experience, because that's why I was called here, and how I did build Guardian to where it is now. A lot of people obviously praise me for that, but I have to start by giving a disclaimer. I just knew how to find the best talent, and I had a bit of staying power. I knew how to motivate them to build and be better than I was at running pharmaceutical retail entities. And that's how I ended up exiting the company and rendering myself jobless. It's a good thing. So I started Guardian back in 2012 when I was still a graduate student at the University of Washington. I was studying public health, and my career path I thought was going to terminate into me being a professor. But while I looked at the health trends, the public health trends in sub-Saharan Africa, I was caught by one thing. Because of my training as a pharmacist, you obviously can't miss the fact that, access to medicine is pivotal to your career and what you trained in. So obviously my research was gravitating largely towards that. I was looking at access to anti-cancer medicines because I had an earlier training as a cancer pharmacist and had worked with the Cancer Institute for a while. Then I was looking at access to medicines used in non-communicable diseases, and there's a study that we did that showed that just the cost of insulin in sub-Saharan Africa could go up to 10 times an individual's daily income. That means for someone to afford a month's supply of insulin, they had to, put up 10 days of work. So if that's just for insulin, what else do they have to spend on? So it was a bit absurd. And on top of that, I realized that I read studies that showed that close to 30% of the medicines that we're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa were counterfeit. So I knew there and then that I couldn't just sit in Western capitals and write research proposals about these problems and then write papers and then get celebrated in air-conditioned conference facilities. I knew that that was the time for me to get my hands dirty and fix the problem. So that speaks to what Colin is saying, that if you're going to attract funding, you have to show that there's a real problem that you want to solve, and then you have to show that you can solve it better than the people who are currently solving it, and you have to show that you can scale your operations to reach a lot more people, and that's where you create value. And then beyond that, of course, we're going to get into the intricacies of investor management and how you convince them to give you the kind of money you need to be able to grow a lasting enterprise. So anyway, I got back here. I was fortunate, and I had like just over $50,000. We started our first store in Kabalagala in March 2013, Muyenga Road. And our choices of that location were not just guesswork. We had done our studies, we had looked at the numbers, we had looked at telecom data, and we had seen where most mobile money transactions were happening. And we knew from experience that Kabalagala was the heartland of rich Kampala. Basically, you know, it served Muyenga, it served Buziga, it served in Zambia, it served Kansanga, Gaba, Munyonyo. So a lot of Ugandans really access that area. And that's when, back when Kabalagala was really the sin city of Uganda. So the town never slept. So we started there and quickly scaled. And there are some lessons you guys might learn from this. We quickly scaled our operations from one store to like a few months later, we were opening in Kansanga, we were opening in Bugolobi, we were opening in Chitintale, Bunga, and whatever. And we're using supplier credit. The thing, oh, thank you so much. I see one of my clients, our clients in Munyonyo. Yeah, so we got excited and we were using supplier credit. The pharmaceutical industry is such that if you get your numbers right and you know that I sell 30 tins of Panadol every month, you can go to the supplier and negotiate for credit of up to 60 days, whereby you don't have to pay them up until 60 days. So basically, by the time you're done churning out the 30 tins, you will have gotten enough return to be able to own those 30 tins straight up. So that kind of business is self-financing if you're smart about it, but also it's tempting to grow so fast and then you can tank. So now for us, and I labor to tell this story in the next maybe 4 minutes so that then we can get back to the lessons I learned and how those drove my financing decisions. And so in 2015, National Drug Authority, whose office is just, I think, on the next block to Enterprise Uganda, said they were going to stop licensing pharmacies in the major districts in Uganda and the major towns in Kampala. So what that meant is that districts like Mbarara, Mbale, Jinja, Kampala, you had very severe distance restrictions. So me, who was running this company as the alpha and the omega, I had no board, I had no nothing. My decision is what went. And any entrepreneur, ask them, they know that ultimately all they want to do is go, 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 go. And without a board that reminds you to grow carefully, to show them how the numbers check out, to show them a lot of these things, you can grow unhinged and grow to your crash. So that's what happened with us. National Drug Authority was going to stop licensing, and my friends in there had told me about that in advance. And I'm like, well, I should be able to, buy a lot of territory. Now, when you go back and map out Guardian's locations, you'll see that Guardian is in the best locations anywhere in Kampala. In every busy location, Guardian is there. So what we did was we decided to blow a lot of our money on getting territory. So while with like 2-3 stores, we had gotten to maybe a turnover of more than $2 million and were very profitable. We decided to use that money to get territory. And if anyone here has tried pharmacy business, you would know that location is the name of the game. And also beyond location, it's a very expensive thing. If you have to get a license, say in Wandegear, beyond the difficulty of getting a building where you're going to put it, you're going to probably spend $150,000 just getting a piece of paper, buying out someone who is in existence. And by the time you set up, you're probably north of 200,000. Now imagine you open, say, 15 of those in the space of 1 year. That's exactly what happened with me. It was very silly, but I think looking back, it was wise. The upside is that my investors, the initial investors, once they came on board, it was easier for them to just pump money into an existing structure and then grow pretty fast. And you've seen some major investors who have tried to invest here, like the largest retail pharmacy chain in Nairobi, Good Life. It's been here for nearly 9 years, and they're not making much headway because of those problems of expansion. It's hard to get good locations. So our decision to bet our future on getting good locations was smart, but then it tanked the company. So basically, we came from turning over close to $3 million by 2015 to barely turning over 400,000. We couldn't even make payroll that easily. We couldn't pay our landlords. We were struggling to pay suppliers. Banks couldn't loan us money. Imagine a bank where you would turn over that kind of liquidity, failing to give you 500 million shillings in loans. So things came to a head around end of 2016, and this speaks to the importance of timing your fundraising. If I'd known what I know now, then of course our journey would have been markedly different. But 2016 we got to a point where I desperately needed money. I had a lot of very nicely located pharmacies, but none of them was making money. The pharmacy, like one in Kabalagala, that at the time would make maybe 300 million. And if you're in the pharmacy business, if you're making like 300 million in sales, you're probably looking at maybe 28, 30 to 35%. But actually, it's more than that. You're looking at maybe 25% net profit. You're looking at nearly 40% gross profit margin. I need to double check those numbers, but yeah, off the top of my head, that's it. It's a wildly profitable business, but then you're in a situation where that store goes down to making barely 20 million shillings. And if you're going to have a pharmacy business in that place, your basic expenses right off the bat, the moment you open your door, you're looking north of 25, 30 million shillings per month, even without selling a tablet. So it's a two-way thing. If you're not making money, you're going to tank. But if you're making money, it's consistent. People never change their providers that easily. It's a very good business. So we're in that spot. Expanded, run out of goodwill of suppliers. Bankers don't want to give us money. So I applied to this one bank. And they called me on a Friday and said, you know what, dude, your facility has been cleared of 500 million shillings. So I knew suddenly I have working capital. And then I go in on Monday and to sign that term sheet and then perfect the mortgage. And they tell me, you know what, our head of credit, who rarely looks at files that are below 1 billion shillings, suddenly called out your file and saw that you have a bounced check. So you're going to have to run this account for another 3 months before we can get back to talking about this loan. Now, I'll give you an analogy in that situation. First, because, well, before I get to the analogy, for us in that kind of business, to secure supplier credit, you just needed to give them an empty check. You just put an amount, sign it, and don't put a date. So when those suppliers panic, it's one community that controls the mid-level distribution chain in pharma. When they panic, they just start banking those checks without ever telling you. Now imagine you're leaving one check to another, it's easy to bounce them. So that was my problem. So on Monday, I suddenly was facing the reality that the company was collapsing and I might end up in Luzira. So I had to quickly look around for alternative ways of financing. So I had the equivalent of, I had spent a fortune buying a Ferrari and I'm driving it to Ginger, and every time I'm getting warnings that, fuel is running out and I'm not paying attention to that. You get to Mavira and suddenly the fuel is out and it's coming to midnight, and you know that anytime someone is going to show up and hack you to death and take your car. And then another guy comes and says, you know what, this is a Ferrari, you paid $500,000, me half. And that million Uganda shillings is in fuel. So we put the fuel and we run. So you make that kind of decision and accept investment and then leave to fight another day. That's exactly my situation. So it's a situation that I hope conversations like this save you from. You need to know when to time your expansion. You need to know when to time your financing. You need to know when to get a board in place and when to listen to them. So fast forward, thankfully, I was able to convince a certain fund whose names I won't obviously reveal, but people who are curious will find it. They had approached me earlier in 2015 and I refused to take them on because I thought I was seeing the money that was going into the bank and I was excited. I was thinking we're making money, but I didn't know our bottom line. I didn't even have a CFO. As the procurement officer, at that time we had got a procurement officer. As the HR, as the books guy, I was everything. And so I didn't know how much money we really were making, but all I was seeing was we were making a lot of money. So they had come 2015 and I had refused, and they come back this time with Guardian having a lot more territory. The best and competitors were struggling to get similar territory, but they were doing valuations based off of revenue and profitability. Now, what that means is they're going to get the upside of you taking reckless bets on getting territory without them accepting the downside of that decision has made you less profitable. So if I'd taken their money when I had fewer stores and used that money to expand in 2015, I would have kept a lot more of the company. But then now I expanded and I was out of working cap, as desperate as in that Mavira situation. Same money gives them majority. So what you guys need to understand is that the best time to raise financing is when your company is doing really well. It's not when you've taken so many wild bets, which are very well informed by business dynamics, but not well calculated in terms of protecting the downside. So that's a play that you need to pay attention to. Best time to sell your company when you're on the high. Now into the nitty gritties of how you get investors on board. So obviously, this deal was one of the fastest in private East African PE business. It took less than 6 months because the company was on life support. So I do, in a way, a huge way, appreciate my then investors because if they had delayed 1 more month, we're going to shut shop and would probably still be in liquidation processes now. But as we speak now, we're looking at a behemoth of retail business that's employing, I think, around 200 Ugandans and being the best taxpayer, the biggest taxpayer in that particular segment. So it's exciting. You get wins that are just beyond personal outcome for you, the founder. Anyway, so yeah, we raised 3 million, had 2 years of nasty fights in the boardroom that I'll tell you about without going into details, but part of the blame goes to the entrepreneur, part of the blame goes to the investor, but you live, you learn. Then after that period, we stabilized, understood each one's work methods, understood each one's fears, and we put the company back on the Autobahn and quickly exited it to some of the biggest capitalists in the US market. When you later find out who exactly bought Guardian, you'll be shocked. These are families that have owned money for more than 200 years. But it's a good thing. So what's the process of onboarding investors and what do they look out for? Obviously, they'll look at proof of concept. Colin said that. Is your idea bankable? Do you make money? Can you grow it? Can you scale it? Now, for me, obviously, 65% and more of Ugandans' first access with the healthcare system is through the pharmacy space and dispensaries. So obviously, there's a market. Can you scale? Yeah, the country needs a lot more pharmacies like Guardian. You find that we have close to 2,500 pharmacies on the register. But Guardian, which is the largest chain, has less than 25 stores. So it means there's still opportunities to consolidate all these smaller players and play off of the value of economies of scale to be able to buy cheaper and get your product to the final consumer cheaper. So yes, we can scale. There's still market for that. Then risk mitigation. Colin hinted on it quite a bit. So risk is not just if I give my money to these guys, because these guys will give you like $3 million and you haven't put, or $4 million or $10 million, you haven't put any of your titles there, you've not put anything. They're buying interests in your company. So what security do you have? Do they have? There's that risk. But the most important risk, I believe, is the key personnel risk. So if, say, someone like Tony is a scatterbrain, yes, he may understand how to grow the company, but he may look at it from a higher level kind of thing. But then you need people who understand the nitty-gritties, and then you need to ensure you have continuity. So if I end up in a border accident and I'm incapacitated or dead, God forbid, that their $10 million investment just go down the drain. So you as a founder, you need to make sure you're preparing the newer generation, the younger generation, to take over after you. And in fact, it's important that you set out to prepare yourself to be rendered useless to the company by these people that you're training. That's the goal. So that way you protect your investors and even yourself from the risk of yourself. So it's important. And how I went about doing that is I decided to start teaching a class on pharmacoeconomics at Makerere Pharmacy School. And I did it pro bono, but my goal was to find smart kids that I could then interest in working with me in Guardian. And that's exactly what I did. And you find that 10 of the people who are in line to run Guardian, at least 7 of them were in my class. And then 3, I met them as interns, including Cedric, who now runs the company. He's barely 30. He's running a multi-million-dollar company, sits in board meetings where guys control maybe $200, $400 million in funds. And they all sit and listen to him. But I met him as an intern just looking for an evening job. And I saw talent and I figured, you know what? I need to groom this kid, show him my vulnerabilities, because you as a founder, you need to be vulnerable in order to allow the other person to be vulnerable. Usually people venerate founders. When you go into the pharmaceutical industry and you talk about my name, everyone will be like, oh, that man is a legend. So the interactions are immediately slanted. The powered play is slanted in my favor. You don't want that as a founder. If you want to build a company that will survive you, you need to show that you're vulnerable. So I was deliberate about doing that. I would take these kids to the mountains. I would invite them home. We sit, have conversations. I would visit their parents. You know, you really get to know them both in the corporate space and in the family space, and then they are free with you. Then after that, you also recognize what people's weaknesses are, strengths are. You keep feeding them rope until you really need not hold on to that rope. You just let them fly on their own. And that's exactly what I did. And by the time I exited, I didn't even need to sit in a lot of those exit meetings, because these guys understood the business better than I did, back and forth. And that freed me up to do other things like mountaineering, things I was a lot passionate about. That's how you take care of your investor. You make sure you render yourself useless by creating new talent that can do better than you. And then the most important thing that a lot of Ugandan companies and startups don't pay attention to is the corporate governance. I'll tell you one thing, that if I had a board that could hold me back, my story with that company, though it turned out great, would have been even greater. Mr. Igam, on the coffee that you're missing out on. So we need to have that appointment soon. So yeah, corporate governance is important, and you need to have a board really that can even fire you. My board could easily have fired me from the company, even for sneezing. And I have to tell you, that's both a good and bad thing. Good because it humbles you. It reminds you that you're building an entity that is looking out for people's lives beyond yourself. Because if you run it into the ground, remember you have like 200 employees. Try to draw that tree on how 200 employees live their lives. And this is Uganda, where you have the black tax. The paycheck you give them, you give a guy a check of say 5 million shillings. He has like 5 brothers to pay for. He has maids. He has what? He has bills to pay. You feed so many people down the chain. So if you run this thing badly, you're affecting more than just you. So it's extremely selfish. It's extremely selfish to not protect an entity from yourself and from your excesses as a founder. And the way you do that is by having a strong board and running it within clearly defined corporate governance structures. So I'm going to spend quite a bit on this. So in business, oftentimes, and and I saw this after we got investment, the champagne had dried out and then fights started. Investors oftentimes get into these fights with founders. Sometimes they're very nasty in the boardroom, and you will see them a lot. A startup raises 20, $30 million, and then suddenly 1 year, 2 years later, it is tanking. Oftentimes, it's a failure to find agreement between the investor and the founding team. And I'll tell you one thing, oftentimes they'll both be right. Allow me to explain why. Um, Investors usually will be driven by they will have a certain ego. They'll feel like they're doing you a favor, otherwise your company is going to tank. And the market is full of mainly those bad ones. It's rare to find one that ab initio respects you and believes in whatever you're doing. But yeah, those are there, but they're few and far between. So they'll be driven by an ego, and also obviously the same can be said of the founder. But at the root of this is a failure to understand each other's role and dare I say, and the decision-making process. Oftentimes, investors are extremely risk-averse individuals playing in a space that requires massive optimism. So keep that at the back of your mind. Don't blurt it out, but just keep it at the back of your mind. Founders also almost always have this insatiable appetite for risk. Investors barely understand this and obviously will push back. And they'll remind you to always hedge against risk. So risk mitigation for you as a founder who is getting investment is important. You need to show how you're protecting their investment against your impulses, which are natural, and they're the ones that actually drive you to want to grow. If entrepreneurs weren't wishing to push the boundaries, we wouldn't be growing businesses the way we grow them. We would all be comfortable building apartments and waiting for monthly rent. So it's important that, yes, you don't tamper that, but also find a way of risk mitigating. So as a founder, you may not have the patience for all the fancy, should I say, X's and O's. I'm sure Collins, when he was speaking, he was asked for projections and all this stuff. And you see people whose understanding of business doesn't go beyond understanding how to manipulate the Excel sheet, telling you how you should run a pharmaceutical business or how you should run this IT business that you've spent your entire life, adult life, actually running. So you may not, you in your head as a founder, you may be like, well, I know that I want to get to point Z, but I can jump from A to X to Y to Z. But your investor wants you to take him through the process of how you got from A, B, C to X before you tell them how you're jumping from X to Z, because that might be obvious. And that can be extremely frustrating for founders. And that's where a lot of these fights actually start. You may not explain how, you just know. So it's it's hard to explain that to someone whose idea, as I said, of business doesn't go beyond manipulating the Excel sheet and throwing around their CFAs. But cut them some slack. And oftentimes your investors also have investors, so they want to keep showing that they understand what you're doing, what they're doing. And if you don't explain to them what you're doing, they will look terrible explaining to their investors what they are doing. So do it for them as you do it for yourself. But yeah, they don't understand your business oftentimes. So when they invest in you, please ensure that you bring them up to speed on how you run the business, how decisions are made, where wins are found, and all that stuff. Then there's something really funny. The guy who used to run, who still runs the fund that invested in me, told me one thing after our constant fights stopped. I'll give an example. We once got a contract to put pharmacies in Mulago. We were the only ones who got that contract. And it was voted down by my board. I imagine the pain of a person like me in the pharmaceutical industry losing that. And obviously it later went to the likes of Fast Pharmacy and EcoFarm. But yeah, you're losing that because your board just didn't understand. For them, they just saw risk. And you, on the other hand, you're seeing upside. And we had an almighty fight. So, but later on, we sat down and ironed out our differences and explained to each other why we made the decisions that we made. And from that, we built some sort of working friendship. And the guy who runs the fund told me, never come to the board meeting for a decision you don't already have. What that means is the onus is on you as the vision bearer to actually find out the interests of your different board members and explain them to them individually. Make the decision that you want to make look like their decision. It's about peopling, which most, I will tell you, most startup founders do not want to do. They just want to get on with it, build what it is they're trying to build, and get on with work. But it's easy. It's easy for you guys to go like, well, these guys just have money. I have ideas. I know how to implement them. So let them go and hang. But you're going to tank your business. So you need to find a way of working with your board to get the wins that work for everyone. They might even be majority, and they're making decisions that are frustrating the business. So you just have to pack your ego aside, go around finding their, wins. So for instance, you will have an investor, say you're in the pharmaceutical space, where you're like, I'm setting up a pharmacy in Karamoja because these guys don't have pharmacies. Therefore, we're going to have to return 10x of the money we invest. And it looks fantastic because you're looking at that from only a returns perspective. While on your investment team, on your board, there's a guy whose interest is to hear about child marriages in Karamoja, how you're impacting society, how many of former child marriage girls you're getting into working for the entity. And that's their interest, the ESG related. And you're pushing economic returns. Now, that's when you have a disconnect. So understanding what that person's interests are will actually easily get you their vote on the board. And once you get that, you know that obstacles are largely sorted for you as a founder. So as I close, understand your value proposition, understand how you scale, understand how you protect the downside, how you de-risk the investment beyond just you saying, oh, I'm a guy of upstanding character. Of course, they'll do that due diligence before they give you their money. But then how do you ensure you reduce that key personnel risk? Then working with your board. Figure out a way to work in an amicable manner, because oftentimes your entity will fail, not because the idea is bad, but because people dynamics between the board and the founding team and the staff is not quite right. And investors have so many portfolio companies. You'll find a guy has like 20 portfolio companies. He just has to sell 2 or 3 of them to return all the money he has invested in all the rest. So for him, Yoka company doesn't look like, a huge needle shifter. It can fail and he will still move on. He will keep collecting his management fees and live to fight another day. But for you, it will be the thing in which you've invested all your life's sweat and efforts and tears. So you need to take care of it, even if that means putting your ego aside for the common good. That's it for now.
The word I hear nowadays is wow. But this is what I'll do. Thank you very much, Natif. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Anthony. Thank you very much for sharing with us. If I were there, I would shake your hand, but I'm not there. Derek, please shake Natif's hand.
Apparently, you should shake my hand.
Thank you, Natif. I've seen that. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. And it's a pity that we can only, go on up to midday. But let's utilize the time we have as much as we can. I picked out a few things, and I just want to say that I'm so glad to hear you repeat and say these things. One thing that we tend to ignore, ladies and gentlemen, as SMEs especially, is research. We just get up and go by the gut. But Anthony says they did their research. There was logic to their location, and location. And then he says territory, scaling up. Sometimes I say, do not stay too small, too long. On the other hand, do not spend money on location and expansion in terms of territory, and you cannot pay your suppliers. He also said, do not go and buy a Ferrari immediately, or a horse for that matter. Be prudent in how the business monies go into your personal pleasures. But he said he still had his pleasures, and I think today he still does, taking young people to the mountains and himself. Supplier credit, we keep saying money, but indeed there are some businesses, if not virtually all businesses. Somebody told me those big supermarkets, all they do is to put up their banner and the shelves, and all the working capital is supplier credit, from the cucumber grower to the gym machines supplier. So yeah, and then get FOMO earlier. Get that structure in place. Who is in charge of procurement? Who is in charge of finances? Who is in charge of auditing? And get them done. Get your board to be there. And don't be too full of yourself. Natif, if I misquote you, you can correct me, but don't be too full of yourself. Be ready to listen to the board anyway. Otherwise, why is it in place?
Exactly.
And he says, source good brains and build a good team. Whatever you do, source good brains and build a good team. And then the good team can help you be free. And one thing which is extremely important, especially for those who are still in younger business and going higher, sell high, don't sell low. Sell when things are going so well. Sell high, don't wait to sell low if you can. And then I think there's so many good points in here, but I have time for a few reactions, questions. So let me keep quiet and give it to you, the questioners, the participants, the people who are interested in this. Let me get 3 people putting up their hands, and we'll give a chance for a couple of reactions. Anybody? Thank you, Natif, once again. Anybody wants to say anything? I see Dennis, of course. Anybody else before I say go? Let me see the hands that want to go up, and then I'll give the mic. Nobody else is up. So, Dennis, please unmute and speak. Dennis, of course. Dennis? Unmute your mic and speak, please. Are you there?
I'm there.
Please.
Thank you, Enterprise Uganda, for this wonderful episode, and Natif and Collins for the presentation. One thing I've noticed is that while I was online, like the African business heroes, the go-getters, I see few Ugandans put in the applications for these fundings. I really don't know why. I only saw one for go-getters. Please keep encouraging people, and this can bring us on. That was my comment. Please let Ugandans participate more, and that comes after you people are supporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Akampura, please unmute and speak. Dennis, you can lower your hand. I don't seem to have another hand. This would imply, Jennifer. Jennifer, please unmute and speak. Unmute on your side. Yeah, please go ahead. Jennifer? Hello, Jennifer. You've unmuted, but we don't hear you. Are you speaking? Okay. I'll give it to Ambrose. Ambrose, please unmute and speak.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anthony. I happen to have had a doctor friend of mine who I actually lived with in the same years from about 2011, 2014, 2016, and was working with you in the pharmacy of Kabalagala. And I actually had so many challenges of payments all the time, month in, month out, 6 months,
Yes,
8
man,
months,
it was
no payments.
tough.
Yeah, so I vividly remember the story at the time, huh? And I'm really glad to hear that you have been able to bring it, of course, maintain the brand on the market locally. It's something we all have to be proud of as Ugandans. What I wanted to find out would be perhaps if you could derive or maybe get a bit deeper in selling the company to the investors in terms of what they'll be requiring or what they need in terms of payments, or how does it actually work? They come, you go to them, you say, need this much money to invest back into your business, but what is it in return that they're taking? And then what is left with you? I would appreciate such kind of an in-depth to that. Thank you.
Let me answer that. Let me answer that real fast. Yeah, those 6 months were the months when we were raising capital. It was rough, really rough. You know, you'd find some little money, a guy that you're supposed to pay 1 million shillings, you pay him 250,000. At the end of the month, you paid whatever you had. You go back home, you like coffee, you don't have coffee, and you just have to pour hot water in a coffee tin just to get the smell of coffee, an empty coffee tin. It was that rough. I don't want to go back into thinking about that. I probably still have PTSD. But all is well that ends well. We sorted all our problems and got things back in line. And which is why I have to beg you guys in the startup ecosystem, don't wait for that moment. Sell your company when you're up at the top. Now, what does selling mean, Ambrose? Selling doesn't mean you get out. though sometimes it can mean you get out, like in my situation. So, and getting out is the holy grail for any founder, really. You go and pursue other things that interest you. If you want to come back and build, you come back and build. I've actually been toying with the idea of starting another chain of pharmacies, but I don't feel like I have the hunger there yet. When it comes, I'll hit the ground running. If I don't, I had my good run. But selling is basically someone comes and says, well, you have a good product, you have a good company, it has an established market, the market can be grown, we have significant upside. If say, I'll give you an example of Guardian. So any chain of pharmacies. I need to stop using Guardian as an example. I'll give you an example of a chain of pharmacies. And say you have 10 pharmacies that make maybe $2 million a year and maybe $150,000 to $200,000 in net profit. It's a good business for any Ugandan. $200,000 every year is really solid return. But so there's something they call, I don't know what the level of entrepreneurs I'm talking to, whether there's first timers and what, but anyway, I'll speak because I know Colin also went into this. So you have multiples on valuation. So they will value your company, whether maybe based on profitability, revenue, maybe future income. There's many ways they can value companies. You need to look into valuation as a subject. It's actually taught in business school as a subject. There are people who get master's degrees in valuation. So it's huge. In the healthcare space, usually you will have people say, well, companies, a good valuation is like, say, 8 times EBITDA. So EBITDA is that your earnings before interest, tax, amortization, and stuff like that. So beyond that, assuming you have that $200,000, not as net profit, but as EBITDA. So the value of your company will be 8 times that, which then brings it to like $1.6 million. It's not an exact science. They will haggle, they will push back, you will push back. Or other guys can say, well, we shall give you a multiple on your revenue, which is say 2x of your $2 million revenue, and then that gets you to a valuation of $4 million. So at $4 million, the man knows that if I put in money today and grow your retail footprint from 10 stores to 30, I've tripled it. If all conditions are constant, it will mean that your revenue will go from $2 million to $6 million. So if you plug in the same multiple, you have a valuation of 12 million. Do you understand? So if at the point your company was worth $4 million, he put in another $4 million, it means that he owns 50% of that company post money. So then the valuation of that company is 8. So by the time you reach X number of stores and say maybe your revenue is $10 million, same multiple, suddenly what he bought at 8, that valuation is 20. So he takes his 50% of 20, that is $10 million. So suddenly $4 million has become 10, you all walk away. Now, in that arrangement, you have to take care of your employees. I always insist on that. Your companies, your employees, if you want to build brand loyalty, you have to ensure that employees own part of your company. So in Guardian, we ensured that our most pivotal employees, including the border guy, Roger, who was one of my favorites and helped us get at least 5 stores. make sure they own at least part of it. So 4% of the company went to the employees in an arrangement called the Employee Share Ownership Program, ESOP. So when you're sharing that return at a later date, you will basically have 12 million to share among employees, yourself, your investors, and then you go. So that's how valuation works. Now, the next guy who gets that company is going to say, well, I need to blanket the whole of Uganda. I need then to merge with guys who are, maybe if you're just brick and mortar, I need to find people who are also building, layering technology on this. So now he builds to 100 stores. At that point, most likely his revenue is maybe 30, $40 million. That is a company that is more valuable than a lot of companies on the Ugandan Stock Exchange. So you can then choose to exit via the stock exchange. People buy shares, and you trade it. It's the holy grail for many of us, that you build a company that will ultimately be able to be traded on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, on the Ugandan Stock Exchange, and stuff like that. And I have every reason to believe that with this new round of investment that has got into Guardian, maybe 2-3 years, maximum 4 years, Guardian should be able to list on the Nairobi Stock Exchange and on the Uganda Stock Exchange. And that's exciting. So it could be a company valued north of $50 million. And that's how it works. Basically, scale, the team you're working with, reputational risk protection, and basically brand building. And then you keep selling at each stage. It's about how much you value shares and how much you increase the value of the same. Thank you guys for having me. I really feel honored. I'm extremely impressed by, of course, I've said it earlier, by how Colin holds himself. I can't wait to look at the business he's running and hopefully grab a coffee or something with him and learn a few things. And I'm cheering for people like him who are putting their best foot forward and trying to change the narrative that, you know, East Africa is where capital comes to die. That shouldn't be the case. And conversations like this improve our chances of building companies that can last beyond the valley of death that hits any company that's scaling. So it's important you guys understand that you're doing the Lord's work. Most countries are built on SMEs, and the more of them that we churn out there, the more successful our societies will be. And you can always count on me to avail myself, create time where schedules allow, to be present, to mentor a few individuals here and there, to speak to someone, encourage someone. Look out for your mental health. You want to talk to someone, even vent, please pick my number, reach out to me. I will listen even when I don't have the solutions you want. Sometimes listening is all we want. The mental health side of entrepreneurship is one of the least talked about things, but it's really important that we pay attention to that. It's the pits, you guys, as is common speak, but you know, we have to do it, and don't hesitate to look out for help. And yeah, I'm cheering for you. Thank you, Mr. Iga. I know you're always in the trenches and stuff like this. You do a thankless job, and I feel like the country owes you a bunch of flowers. And thanks, Enterprise Uganda, for continuously putting this together. Let's keep building. Have a good one, and you take care of yourselves.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I hadn't heard that one. East Africa is where capital comes to die. What?
Yeah, like apparently 50% of the capital that comes here is not returned. So
I'm very sorry.
Some investors look at it as some sort of charity to invest in East Africa. We need to give them a reason.